Do you think you know the people around you? You believe you can identify when someone is toxic, when an energy is heavy, when a behavior crosses the line of what is acceptable. But what if I told you that the real dangers are not obvious? That the most destructive people are often charming, kind, even family members? And that while you try to protect yourself from the obvious villains, you are opening the doors of your mind to something infinitely more dangerous, the unconscious of others invading your own. That's not just a poetic warning, it's a psychological reality that Carl Jung, one of the most profound minds in modern thought, spent his life trying to help us see. Most people live unaware of the hidden forces that shape their relationships, their emotions, their very sense of self. And while you're out here trying to be kind, trying to be good, trying to keep the peace, there are people, some close to you, who are quietly taking up space in your mind and soul, without even realizing it themselves. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Stoic philosophy teaches us to master the self, to guard our inner world as fiercely as a soldier guards the gates of the city, because once you let unconscious energy in, once you play a role in someone else's unresolved story, you start losing touch with who you are, and the worst part, you don't even notice until the damage is already done. So today, we're going to expose the 6 most dangerous personality types Carl Jung warned us about. These aren't your typical bad guys. They don't scream, they don't fight, they just infect, slowly, silently, and deeply. But once you understand their patterns, you take back the power. You reclaim your peace. If that sounds like the kind of growth and clarity you're here for, then do me one simple, free favor. If you appreciate what we're doing here, if this message resonates, just hit that subscribe button. That one little click helps this channel reach the people who need this, and it lets me keep giving you real tools for building unshakable inner strength. 1. The unconscious manipulator. Some people walk into a room and change the air, not with noise, not with chaos, but with weight, a heaviness that wasn't there before. You were fine a moment ago, grounded in your own thoughts, maybe even at peace. But suddenly, after a conversation with them, you feel emotionally foggy, disoriented, tired in a way sleep can't fix, and you can't quite explain why. These are the people who don't throw stones, they hand you theirs, quietly, subtly, wrapped in the velvet of vulnerability or the silk of victimhood. You don't see the transfer happen. All you know is that now you feel wrong, you feel like the villain, you feel responsible, you didn't yell, you didn't insult. In fact, you were just listening, trying to be a good friend, a good partner, a kind soul. But somehow, you're left holding a burden that was never yours to begin with. These people rarely raise their voice. They don't have to, because their weapon isn't loud, it's invisible, it's guilt. And it works like a charm. Why? Because it slips past your defenses. It wears the mask of emotional honesty. But make no mistake, it's not about sharing, it's about offloading. Carl Jung had a name for this: projection. When someone refuses to face their inner wounds, the shame, the rage, the fear, they toss those unclaimed emotions onto the nearest safe target. Often, that's the person who seems emotionally stable, the person who listens, the person who holds space. In other words, you. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But here's the twist. Some people flip that process. Instead of using their discomfort to grow, they make it your fault. They won't ask, why am I hurting? They'll say, you're the reason I feel this way. And they believe it. Let's say they're angry. It's not, I have unresolved rage. It's, you made me angry. They feel insecure. You're judging me. They feel abandoned. You don't care enough. Over time, this emotional looping turns into a pattern, a psychological game of hot potato where you're always the one left holding the fire. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom," but some people fear that kind of knowing. Because to know yourself, you have to face the parts you'd rather hide, the parts that hurt. And for some, that's too much, so they project those parts instead, onto co-workers, onto friends, onto spouses, onto you. It's not always malicious. In fact, many of these people would be shocked if you told them what they were doing, because it's unconscious, it's survival. Their pain has nowhere to go, so it spills out, and you're the nearest shore. But here's the truth. Stoicism reminds us of: you are responsible for your mind, not for other people's wounds. Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And in this case, the reaction isn't about confrontation, it's about awareness. You have to be able to recognize the signs. If every time you speak your truth, someone cries. If every time you set a boundary, someone says you're cruel. If every time you protect your energy, someone accuses you of abandoning them. That's not connection. That's emotional enmeshment. Plato warned about the danger of shadows, of confusing the projection for reality. In his famous allegory of the cave, people mistake the shadows on the wall for truth because it's all they've seen. In emotional relationships, projection works the same way. You start to believe you are the problem, that maybe you did say something wrong, that maybe you are selfish. You internalize the shadow someone else cast. So here's your daily act of philosophical self-defense. Pause. Pause when you feel the shift. When your stomach tightens after a conversation. When you walk away and feel like you've just been through a storm you didn't sign up for. And ask yourself, is this emotion actually mine? If the answer is no, if it doesn't originate from your own choices, your own values, your own voice, then drop it. That guilt, that shame, that weight, it's not your luggage. Don't carry it. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear, and clarity, as the Stoics taught, is the root of peace. Socrates once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." But I'll add this, the life where you're forced to carry other people's emotional baggage isn't worth shrinking for. You can still be kind. You can still be compassionate. But you do not have to become the emotional landfill for people who refuse to take out their own trash. So the next time you feel heavy without reason, remember, kindness should never come at the cost of your own clarity. That's not love, that's sacrifice. And Stoicism reminds us that the first duty we owe is not to others, but to our own soul. 2. The Master of the Mask. There's a kind of person who seems to always get it right. Their words are measured, their posture controlled, their life, at least from the outside, feels spotless, organized, polished to a shine. They're never too emotional, never too opinionated, never too messy. And at first, it's magnetic. You're drawn in by their calm, their certainty, their aura of competence. You think, wow, they really have it together. But then, something starts to feel off. It's subtle. It's not what they say, but what they don't. The way conversations stay on the surface. The way they nod instead of connect, laugh instead of feel. It's like they're playing a role, but the role is all there is. And suddenly you realize you're not really with a person. You're with a performance. Carl Jung had a name for this mask. He called it the persona, the image we show the world so we can function in society. It's not inherently bad. In fact, it's necessary. We all wear masks. We have to. You're not going to show the same side of yourself to your boss as you would to your childhood best friend. But the danger, Jung warned, is when we become the mask, when we confuse the role we play with the person we are. The Stoics spoke about this too in a different way. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, reminded himself daily, "Be not deceived. You are not your role, not your title. You are a soul carrying its own judgment." But some people forget that. They merge their worth with their image, and when they do, they can't handle anything that threatens that image. That's why vulnerability makes them squirm. That's why they dodge real emotions like they're stepping around fire. Say something honest, they freeze. Cry in front of them, their face stiffens. Not because they don't care, but because they've buried their own emotions so deep, they've forgotten how to hold space for anyone else's. And here's where it gets dangerous. When you're close to someone like this, someone who lives through their mask, you slowly start adapting. You start editing your truth. Not because they tell you to, but because you want to match the vibe. You want to stay in sync. So you hide your tears. You soften your opinions. You smooth out your edges. You become less of yourself. Plato wrote that truth is the beginning of every good thing. But in relationships like this, truth becomes a threat. Authenticity becomes a disturbance in the script, and so the unspoken rule becomes clear. Keep it clean, keep it cool, keep it controlled. The worst part, you might not even notice you're doing it. One day, you just wake up feeling disconnected from others, from yourself, like you're acting in a play you didn't audition for. This is the emotional cost of being around someone who's overly identified with their persona. You don't just lose depth in the relationship, you lose depth in yourself. Aristotle said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom," but that self-knowledge requires honesty, vulnerability, messiness, and when you're around someone who avoids all of that, you start avoiding it too, just to keep the peace. So here's the check-in. How often do you censor yourself around them? Not for safety, but for approval. Not because you're afraid of hurting them, but because you're afraid of breaking the perfect image. If you're constantly watching your tone, your tears, your truth, you might not be in a relationship, you might be in a performance. And you weren't made to be a supporting actor in someone else's highlight reel. Socrates famously said, "The greatest way to live with honor is to be what we pretend to be." That means being real, taking off the mask, facing the discomfort of being human and allowing others to do the same. Because here's the deeper truth. A relationship where you can't be real is a prison with soft cushions. You deserve more than that. You deserve space where you don't have to filter your feelings, where you don't have to shrink to fit someone else's idea of perfect, where your mess isn't just tolerated, it's met with presence. So if you find yourself always adjusting, always acting, always afraid to be fully seen, take a breath. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to step off that stage. 3. Calm on the outside, chaos inside. There are people who carry themselves like a lighthouse, steady, calm, composed. They don't shout, they don't slam doors, they don't break down or blow up. They're admired for their self-control, their maturity, their commitment to always doing what's right. They show up, do the work, keep the peace, and at first glance, it's easy to believe they've got life mastered. But that's silence. It's not always peace. Sometimes it's pressure. And that calm exterior, it can be a mask over a volcano. Because beneath that smooth surface is often a war, one they refuse to fight openly. A storm of feelings they've decided don't fit who they're supposed to be. Anger, envy, ambition, shame, grief. Emotions society teaches us to hide, especially if you want to be the strong one. So they bury them deep, and they build their identity on the illusion of being above it all. Carl Jung warned us about this. He called it the repressed shadow, the parts of ourselves we push down, ignore, or outright deny. But here's the catch. What we repress doesn't disappear. It waits, it builds, and eventually it demands to be seen. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And when this shadow finally surfaces, it's rarely soft, it explodes, and it doesn't come out as clean emotion. It comes out as sarcasm, coldness, passive aggression. It leaks through in judgments and jabs, in the sharp tone you didn't see coming, in the guilt trip wrapped in a smile. And you, the person close to them, become the target. Not because you deserve it, but because you're there, because you're safe enough to receive what they won't admit they're carrying." Plato once said, "The measure of a man is what he does with power." And emotional power is no different. These people have emotions they don't know what to do with, so instead of processing them, they let them rot beneath the surface. And what rots eventually poisons. You might start noticing small things first. Eye rolls when you speak, a polite but dismissive tone, a subtle criticism that doesn't feel like a joke. You question it. Then you question yourself. You start walking on emotional eggshells, even though no one's yelling. That's how it works. Quiet erosion. In Stoicism, we're taught to know ourselves deeply and to train our responses with reason and reflection, not suppression. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But many people misunderstand that. They think suppression is strength. They confuse silence with control. But there's a difference between self-mastery and emotional avoidance. Here's what makes it so tricky. From the outside, they look grounded. They follow the rules. They say the right things. They show up on time. But you can feel the tension underneath. You just can't name it, and they won't admit to it because their entire identity is built on not being the kind of person who loses control. Socrates said, "The shortest and surest way to live with honor in the world is to be in reality what we appear to be." But these individuals have split themselves in two, who they show the world and what they've shoved into the basement of their psyche. And the longer that gap exists, the more pressure it builds. Eventually, the pressure needs a release, and that release doesn't always look like rage. It can be sabotage, withdrawal, cold detachment, and suddenly you're the one left feeling anxious, insecure, or guilty, without even understanding why. So what do you do? First, don't mistake composure for health. Calm is only peace when it's connected to honesty. Second, start paying attention to the micro-expressions, the quiet signs, the clipped responses, the judgment behind the compliments, the subtle tension in the room. The small things are telling you something. And finally, don't wait for the explosion. If you sense someone is emotionally repressing themselves to dangerous levels, step back. Create space, protect your energy, because when someone refuses to deal with their shadow, they will always project it onto someone else, and that someone doesn't have to be you. As Epictetus taught, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. You can't control their inner war. You can only choose whether you stand in its path. Protect your peace. Not all danger comes with noise. Some of it whispers, and some of it wears a smile. 4. The Holy Critic. There's a certain kind of person who always seems to have the right thing to say. They speak with conviction. They come across as deeply principled, maybe even wise. At first it sounds like care, like concern. They say they want what's best for you, but somehow you always leave the conversation feeling smaller than when you walked in. They rarely raise their voice. They don't insult you directly. Instead, they wrap their criticism in compliments. They lace judgment with virtue. You hear things like, "I'm just trying to help," or "A real friend tells you the truth," or the classic, "You'll thank me later." And yet, instead of feeling supported, you feel shame creeping in, like you've done something wrong just by being yourself. Carl Jung understood this pattern well. He warned that when people repress their own darker impulses, the envy, the lust, the resentment, they often start projecting those traits onto others. They can't admit those feelings live inside them, so they go hunting for them in everyone else. The most dangerous things, Jung wrote, are not the conscious perversions, but the unconscious ones. In other words, the people who think they're doing the most good may be the ones causing the deepest harm. Aristotle believed that true virtue lies in balance, the golden mean between extremes. But the people we're talking about don't live in that balance. They live in extremes of judgment masked as ethics. And the closer you get to them, the more you start to feel like you're on trial. Your choices are dissected, your dreams are criticized, your individuality is treated like rebellion. They're not trying to help you grow. They're trying to make you feel guilty for growing outside the mold they believe is acceptable. In Stoic philosophy, real morality doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from mastering yourself. Epictetus taught, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. That means stepping away from the need for approval, even moral approval, because sometimes people use values as a weapon, not to elevate others, but to avoid facing their own contradictions. And here's where it gets really tricky. These people genuinely believe they're doing the right thing. They don't see themselves as controlling. They think they're correcting, they're teaching, they're guiding. But what they're really doing is keeping their own shadow at bay by trying to clean up yours. Plato, in the Republic, described the danger of people who love the appearance of virtue more than the actual work of virtue itself. These people don't want truth, they want control. And they wrap that control in sacred language, so you won't question it, so you'll internalize it. So eventually you'll start second-guessing yourself every time you try to rest, speak up, or take a different path. The result? Their voice becomes your inner critic. You don't hear your own thoughts anymore, you hear theirs. You don't make choices out of clarity, you make them out of fear of disappointing their imagined standards. You become obedient to a rulebook you never agreed to follow. And here's the truth they don't want you to know. Morality that's forced isn't morality, it's manipulation. If someone's guidance makes you shrink instead of expand, it's not loving, it's controlling. If their advice leaves you ashamed instead of empowered, it's not truth, it's projection. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." That includes people who talk like they're wise but haven't done the deep, painful work of self-reflection. Because real morality doesn't need a spotlight, it doesn't need applause, and it definitely doesn't need to make others feel small. So ask yourself, do I feel more myself around this person or less? Do their words build me up, or do they subtly suggest I'm never enough? If someone's version of help consistently makes you feel ashamed for living your truth, that's not virtue. That's fear in disguise. Socrates said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." And yet, the moral controller walks through life acting like they know everything about who you should be. That's not wisdom. That's arrogance. And it's the kind of arrogance that isolates you from your own compass. You are not here to live by someone else's rigid rulebook. You are here to grow, to fall, to learn, to try again. And no one, no matter how righteous they sound, gets to stand in the way of that. So if their voice is drowning out your own, it's time to turn the volume down. Reclaim your space. And remember that real moral strength comes from listening inward, not bending outward. 5. Walking on emotional eggshells. Some relationships feel like home, others feel like weather, sunny one moment, stormy the next, with no warning and no logic. One day you're embraced, the next you're pushed away. One minute you're the hero, the comfort, the joy, and the next you're the target of some emotion you never saw coming. You start tiptoeing through every conversation, wondering if this is the moment it all turns again. It's confusing, exhausting, and slowly it wears you down. The person in front of you doesn't always seem cruel. Sometimes they're deeply affectionate. They laugh with you, dream with you, even cry in your arms. And then, without any clear reason, they flip. Their tone changes. Their words cut. Their body stiffens. And you're left wondering what you did wrong, even when deep down, you know you didn't do anything at all. Carl Jung gave us a powerful metaphor for this. He described emotional complexes as if they were little personalities living inside the psyche, fragments of pain, memory, and emotion that operate independently of our conscious self. And when one of these gets triggered, it takes the wheel. It drives behavior, reactions, decisions, and the person affected, they become a passenger in their own mind. They're not faking it. They genuinely don't understand why they reacted the way they did, why a simple comment spiraled into an argument, why a normal day turned into emotional chaos. Because in those moments, they're not responding to you. They're responding to something much older, an echo of a past wound. But here's the truth that hurts. Even if they don't mean to hurt you, it still hurts. Even if it's not about you, you're still affected. Plato once said, "We can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy is when men are afraid of the light." The light in this case is self-awareness, the courage to face our triggers instead of letting them run our lives. When someone refuses to look at their own pain, they'll keep projecting it outward, onto people who didn't cause it and can't heal it. And if you care about them, it's easy to slip into the role of caretaker. You become the one who understands, the one who absorbs. You learn to anticipate their moods, manage their stress, avoid their triggers. You think if you can just do everything right, the explosions will stop. But they don't. And in the process, something happens quietly, slowly, almost invisibly. You start to disappear. You stop speaking freely. You stop asking for what you need. You tell yourself, this isn't the right time, or they've been through a lot, or maybe I'm being too sensitive. But that's how emotional self-abandonment begins, not all at once, but in little steps of silence. The Stoics believed that peace comes from self-discipline, not controlling others, but mastering your own reactions. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you." That's a powerful reminder for anyone learning to regulate their own emotions. But for people ruled by complexes, that skill doesn't come naturally. They feel and they act. There's no pause in between. And when you're on the receiving end of that behavior long enough, you begin to feel like you're living someone else's emotional story. Their past becomes your present. Their wounds shape your reality. And you start blaming yourself for how they feel. But here's the thing. Their healing is not your responsibility. Your empathy doesn't mean you're their therapist. Your love doesn't mean you have to be their emotional regulator. Socrates believed that the key to a meaningful life was knowing what is and isn't yours. And if someone can't manage their emotional storms, it is not your job to hold up an umbrella and hope for sunshine. You can care, you can support, but you cannot sacrifice your emotional safety to save someone who refuses to do their inner work. So how do you know when you've gone too far? When you start editing yourself more than expressing yourself. When you're always monitoring their mood instead of checking in with your own. When your days feel like walking a tightrope. Careful, 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 not because of anything you did, but because you've been conditioned to keep the peace at all costs. That's not connection, that's survival. And you were not made to live in emotional survival mode. You were made to feel safe, heard, seen. To be in relationships where emotions are shared, not thrown. Where growth is mutual, not one-sided. Where you're not required to be a mind reader just to get through the day. So if you've found yourself in a relationship, romantic, family, friendship, where love comes with landmines, take a moment. Ask yourself, am I living to keep them stable or to be myself? Because as Epictetus reminds us, no man is free who is not master of himself. And if they're not mastering themselves, they'll try to manage you. You didn't break them. Don't try to fix them. Let them take the journey of self-awareness that we all must take. And in the meantime, take yours, one that leads you back to clarity, to balance, to the emotional safety you deserve. You are not their emotional babysitter. You are not the glue for someone else's brokenness. You are allowed to walk away from chaos, no matter how kind the source appears to be. 6. The quiet energy thief. Some people never raise their voice. They never throw blame or start fights. In fact, they might seem gentle, soft-spoken, maybe even fragile. They speak in quiet tones. They ask for very little all at once, but over time, they take everything. At first you don't notice it. You're just being kind, just showing up, just answering that late-night message, just staying a little longer when they're upset, just helping them through another rough day. You're a good person. That's what you do, right? But then one day, you wake up feeling tired. Not just physically, but in your bones. A kind of emotional fatigue that lingers, even after a good night's sleep. You notice that every time they're around, your chest feels a little tighter, your mind a little foggier, your energy a little dimmer, and worst of all, you've started to feel guilty for needing space. This is what emotional enmeshment looks like. This is what happens when someone doesn't just need support. They need your soul to survive. And it's not always malicious. It's not about manipulation in the classic sense. It's more like dependence disguised as connection. Carl Jung didn't use the term psychic vampire, but he described this pattern in depth. He called it a symbiotic relationship, where one person becomes psychologically fused with another, unable to distinguish their identity without constant reflection from the other. In simpler terms, they need you to exist. They survive by attaching to your presence, your stability, your strength. But there's a cost, and that cost is you. Plato once said, "The worst form of injustice is pretended justice." In the same spirit, the worst form of emotional dependence often hides behind the mask of love, care, or closeness. These people don't scream or push you away. They pull you in so deeply, so subtly, that you don't even realize you've crossed the line from supportive partner to emotional caretaker. They are always in a crisis, always going through something, and somehow the story never changes. You offer advice. They nod but don't act. You offer time. They need more. You give empathy. It becomes expectation. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to shape your days around their needs. You start sacrificing small things, your time, your peace, your interests, and then the bigger things, your truth, your boundaries, your sense of self. Marcus Aurelius warned us to protect our inner fortress, to guard the mind like a citadel. "The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts," he wrote. But in relationships like this, your thoughts aren't yours anymore. They're filtered through someone else's distress. Your mind becomes crowded with their stories, their worries, their chaos. And here's what's hard to accept. These people don't want to grow. They say they do. They might even believe they do. But they've learned that being in crisis gets them something far more comforting than change. It gets them you. Epictetus, the Stoic teacher, taught that true freedom comes from self-responsibility. He said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." But in these types of bonds, the person you're trying to help refuses that mastery. They don't want to stand on their own. They want to lean. Always. And if you allow it, they'll lean until you collapse. And the longer you stay, the more your identity starts to blur. You don't know where you end, and they begin. Their pain becomes your mood. Their silence becomes your anxiety. Their dependence becomes your prison. This is when you need to pause and ask the question that sets everything in motion. Am I helping, or am I just being drained? It's not cold to ask that. It's not selfish. It's clarity. It's what the Stoics called living according to nature, which means living with truth and balance, not martyrdom. Socrates believed that self-knowledge was the foundation of all wisdom. So here's some self-knowledge that matters. You cannot carry someone who refuses to walk. You can offer a hand, but if they anchor themselves to your back, you'll both drown. And before you tell yourself, "But they need me," remember, true love doesn't consume. It creates space, space to breathe, to grow, to be. You deserve relationships that feed you, not ones that feed on you. You deserve peace that doesn't come with a price. You deserve to be whole, not hollowed out by someone else's fear of standing on their own. So start reclaiming your energy. Start returning to yourself. Because the moment you do, you'll remember what you've known all along. You were never put here to be someone's emotional life raft. You were born to rise. And real love, real connection, rises with you. The most dangerous weight is the one you carry in silence when your heart is heavy, but your mouth says nothing. So here's your reminder. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to choose clarity over chaos, truth over illusion, and strength over sacrifice. If this message found you at the right time, there's a reason. And if you're ready to go even deeper, there's another video waiting for you on the screen right now. One that will help you continue this journey of awareness and inner power. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal. We don't just talk about philosophy here. We live it, one insight at a time. Take what resonated, leave what didn't, and carry forward with intention. We'll see you again soon.